And after the tears and heartbreak of the despicable Lucy Letby case comes anger at the failing NHS and its droid army of managers for falling asleep at the wheel. Clinicians with decades of experience frequently blew the whistle about Letby's canny trick of being on shift virtually every time a helpless infant was tortured to death. Far from ordering urgent probes, cowardice management who backslapped each other at award ceremonies as babies were literally killed under their watch, fobbed off parents, even those who were just desperate to go to the police for good reason. Pen pusher bosses, the HR frequenting squares who drown staff and bureaucracy, forced experienced doctors to write letters of apology to Letby, promising not to cause her further stress. And they escaped with their multi-million-pound pension pots before the full aftermath of their arrogance exploded, proving once and for all that the NHS is a terminally sick institution unworthy of public trust. But do you agree? Dan at gbnews.com or vote in our poll at gbnews on Twitter. But to clash on this now, former Health Minister Edwina Currie, ex-UKIP leader Henry Bolton and former NHS consultant Professor Carol Sikora. Now, Edwina, it doesn't bring me any joy to have to say that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we don't have any choice, you know, about trusting the NHS because we need it. For the vast majority of people in this country, there isn't any alternative, particularly when you get older. The cost of health insurance becomes really prohibitive. So we have to trust the NHS. And in most cases, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I think what's going to need to happen is a shift in culture, though, amongst the management, whether they're qualified nurses or doctors or not qualified in that way. There has to be a shift of culture so that when somebody makes a complaint, whether it's a patient or whether it's a member of staff, the attitude should not be, you know, my institution is perfect. How dare you rock the boat? We've seen this as well, Dan, remember, in the police. Big institutions that really take on board that the institution's reputation is more important than actually dealing with the issues that are affecting its performance. Of course, that backfires spectacularly badly when we actually discover what has been going on. In this particular case, though, I'm being a little cautious because I personally would like to see the police very much involved. I think there are perhaps more cases to be brought.
Henry Bolton, how can we trust the NHS, though, when we have seen yet again that they would rather cover their own arse than actually stop a psychopathic nurse on a baby-killing spree?
Dan, Edwina has got it entirely right. We have no choice but to trust the NHS. It is all we've got, or most people in this country. It's all they've got.
But it doesn't have to be run this way.
No, that's the point, though. The question is it actually serving the people of this country in the way that it should? Is it structured correctly for it? Now, I'm not one for breaking up the NHS. I'm not one for privatising. But actually, in a sense, that's what was done under the foundation trusts. And I think, you know, a lot of the problems started there, but back under Alan Milburn. But Labour Health Secretary. But the question is, how do we make it fit for purpose so that we don't even have to ask this question? Can we trust the NHS? How do we ensure that the management is in tune with the clinical delivery of the NHS? Because, frankly, I don't believe that it is in many cases. And what we cannot have here is the administrative tail wagging the clinical dog. You know, it just isn't the way that this can happen. The managers should be there to support the clinical delivery, and I don't feel they are.
Professor Carol Sikora, of course, you are someone who I impeccably trust, a regular on the show, obviously, one of our leading cancer professors. But what went wrong here? What went wrong here? Why were senior doctors ignored and actually, Carol, told to apologise to Letby during her murdering spree?
It is appalling. But if we look at it, there's no clash here. We're all in agreement, I think. We have to trust the NHS, but we have to watch what's happened over the last 40 years. I've been a consultant for 40 years now, just over. And there's been huge changes. The managers are now in charge. You wouldn't, in an aeroplane, you're going on a jumbo jet to America, you wouldn't listen to a manager counting the beans in the toilet. You'd listen to the captain if there was a problem. That's what we've got to get to. The clinicians have to be in charge. And I don't mean those that want to go into management. People that do neonatal care for babies, they should be the ones that run the unit and make the decision, just as I had to when I was Director of Cancer Services in West London. I made the decisions. I went through about 10 different managers over the 20-year period I did the job, and some were very good, some were not good, but I called the tune, and that's what we've got to get back to. The management culture in the NHS is appalling. The quality at the top is actually very good. The chief executives, on the whole, are first class, but underneath there's a raft of people bordering on incompetence.
Well, that's interesting. That gives me hope in terms of the big bosses being OK in your view. But Edwina, I am actually going to question something that Professor Sikora has said there. I don't think we should say we have to trust the NHS. Trust is earned. And the problem is, Edwina, for far too long in this country, we have treated the NHS as a religion. And while we continue to do this, these absolute terrible scandals, and we know Letby is just one of many that are being exposed at the moment, are going to keep happening.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. You can't treat it as a sacred cow, because that is very much not what it is. I would disagree with the professor, if I may, because actually there were senior people in management who were qualified nurses, who were qualified doctor. It was the mindset of the people at the top that was wrong. I would say, no, let's not reorganise the thing again. When I was a health minister, we went through all the reorganisation of the health service there, and it costs a fortune. Everything gets rebranded, millions and billions get spent, and you end up with exactly the same problems being handled, usually by exactly the same people. What needs to happen is that in that weekly or bi-weekly management meeting, there needs to be, as a significant part of the decision-making, what went wrong last week, or what nearly went wrong last week. Let's use that as a learning exercise, an opportunity to improve. Instead, what happens is nothing went wrong last week because we sat on it. And that's the attitude, the culture that really has to change, and it requires a complete change in culture, training, everything.
Indeed.